Hello, book lovers, and welcome to another episode of Inside the Cover Book Club, where every month we pick a book to read, but best of all, we get to interview the author of that book. I'm your host, Gil Rolon, and today's author for the month of December is Kathy Lockwood. I'd like to invite Kathy to the stage. How are you, Kathy?
I'm well, thank you very much.
Great, and it's great to have you with us.
Mm, Thank
Before we start the interview, I would like to let the audience know a little bit more about you, the books that you've written as an author. These books teach children different lessons like spiritual growth, lessons about adoption, and also about addiction. Though these are serious topics, Kathleen puts it in a way that's very inviting and it helps parents to teach their kids about these serious subjects. So I'd like to talk about these books. One of her books is called A Christmas Eve Adventure, perfect for the month of December. Another book she's written is An Adoption Made in Heaven. And the last book we'll talk about in this interview is The King and the Monster. We'll go more into each of these books as we introduce Kathleen and get to talk to her. But first, I'd like to tell you a little bit about her and the work she's done. Kathy has her master's in art education from Penn State University and is also an ordained interfaith minister from the One Spirit Learning Alliance in New York City. She's also the founder of the Heart Self Speaks Collective and CEO of a major commercial real estate entity in the Poconos. She was a recipient of the Bob Duro Award for the Arts, serves on the board of her local YMCA, and has served on the Strasbourg Borough Council. So, Kathy, welcome to this show, and thank you for being with us today.
and thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And I think your work is so important because I think it does help parents to talk to children about subjects that can be hard to express or may feel uncomfortable. So let's start with one of your books, A Christmas Eve Adventure. What
Okay.
inspired you to write that story?
Well, that story started like probably 25, 30 years ago when my children were very young. And we took long car rides to go visit my parents, their grandparents, and we didn't have like iPads or anything in the car, and so with three little kids in the car, they would just say, "Tell us a story, tell us a story." So I made up stories, just spontaneous stories for hours as we were driving along, and I named the three children in my fantasy stories Sammy, Cammy, and Little Lammy because I had Trieste, Dominic, and Little Amelia, and they all knew who they were. And so apparently, over Christmas time, I made up this story, and they loved it. I, at some point, tried to make it into an animation, so I had like a storyboard and everything for it,
Mhm.
and that just became an overwhelming task, quite honestly. And so I just felt the story was so important that, and a number of people were constantly telling me, "Why don't you just make it into a book instead of an animation?" So I did decide to write it as a book, which was a lot of challenging editing from the original story. But I think I carried it through with everything the way I wanted it to be. Um, Basically, I've studied spirituality. Was raised Catholic. Always told, God is everywhere. The Bible says that you are the light of the world. Um, and I just thought it was a really good Christmas story to have. All of my stories are two part. There's the adventure part. So there's the adventure where they, get pulled out a window and and pass through time and space and land in the field with shepherds and have a talking bird and all of the adventure parts that children love in a story. But the essence of the story is that God is an indwelling spirit, that God not only loves us, but we are the personified expression of that love. And just imagine what a world it would be if everybody knew that, if everyone grew up knowing that. Because I was in my 20s, sometime in my 20s, before I started really wondering about, well, if God is everywhere, is he here? Here? Is he in my arm? So this book sort of just tells kids right up front, yeah, God is there and he's in your heart. So um, so that's why I did that. I just think it's a very, very, very important message for children to understand that they represent the love of God themselves. But of course, it's a great adventure story.
Yes, I think it will capture children's imaginations. And what were some of the lessons you were hoping parents could teach their children from that book?
Well, like I said, I have the book right here, so I can give you some. It's beautifully illustrated. Um, the most important part of this book is when the children recognize that, here's the illustration, everyone has the light of the world in them. And when Cami asked the guardian, the angel, at some point, well, what about mean people? Do mean people have uh, the light in them? And I've got to get to that page.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that
She
part,
says,
how you explained
even me? Because Cami was a little on the nasty
it.
side at the beginning of this story. And so, even me, she says, everyone? What about mean people? And the angel smiles and says, people are unkind when they forget the light they have inside, but God is still there. Just remember, the greater your love, the brighter your light. It's so easy for us to look at people that are mean or doing nasty things or things that we just simply don't approve of. And we forget that God is there also. So that's one of the most important parts of this story, that God is everywhere, even in mean people.
Yeah, and even we can teach children and ourselves sometimes when we're not at our best. Um,
Right,
once, yep, one spiritual writer wrote that we don't have to be good; we just have to let the good in us come out. So sometimes we block our own light, our own goodness. So I think
right,
that's an amazing lesson to teach kids that you make mistakes, you just have to let the best of you out, the most of the time, right?
right. Don't put that bushel over that light. So I think and I'm an interfaith minister. So this is this is written as a Christmas story, but I would venture to say it's an interfaith Christian story, because a Christmas story that's Christian, but all the world religions talk about that inner light, and so whatever religion you are, it still applies to your belief systems.
That's great. That's a great point. Let's move on to the next book, An Adoption Made in Heaven. Tell us about that inspiration.
That's this one.
Hmm.
I Well, this was the very first book I wrote, and I wrote it a long time ago, and then I just recently edited it a little bit, changed the title, and um, put it out again with the other two books. But that book was started because my son is adopted, and I had a birth child, my oldest daughter, and then I had a miscarriage before and after her. And then one day I got a phone call from my husband, who was a lawyer in another town. And he said, Kathy, I just got a phone. A woman just walked in and she's 5 months pregnant with her and she wants me to find a good family, a loving family for this baby. Do you want him? I think it's going to be a boy. So, so I said, sure, sure, I want that baby. And so 4 months later, I became the mother of my son. Now, an interesting part of this is about 2 months before he was born, I had this dream. And in my dream, I was holding this big, chunky, blonde baby boy. Now, my daughter at the time, my late husband, was fully 100% Italian. So it was the dark hair and the dark skin and everything. And then I'm having this dream where I have this big, blonde, chunky boy in my arm. And 2 months later, I did have that big, blonde, chunky boy in my arms. And so I knew that this was not an accident. It wasn't a fluke. It wasn't a mistake, that this child was due to be mine and my husband's, and it was a divine plan, karma, whatever, God's plan, whatever you want to call it. But it was destined to be. And so 4 years, no, I guess 5 or 6 years later, he's in kindergarten or first grade. And he came home and he was like really angry. And I finally got it out of him that, one of his girlfriends, got a lot of girlfriends. He was cute. One of his girlfriends told him I wasn't his real mommy. And he cried and cried. Now, we had told him he was adopted, but he didn't really have the concept of the birth parent. And so I said to him, I am your real mommy. Look, touch me, feel me. I'm real. But I felt it was important. I understood that whether my child was born to me or adopted by me, I was the real mommy, that my husband was real daddy, and we were the real family. And I understood that, and I thought it was important to write a book for the children that are wondering about it. Do I really belong here? And especially my son, who was, very upset to discover I wasn't his real mommy. And so I wrote the book. I had to go out and buy a computer and go take classes on how to use it. It was really early. I was one of the first books on Amazon. When I got my Midwest Book Review, they sent me a letter saying, we're putting you on Amazon. And I said, what's that? That's how long ago this book came out. My son is now 34. So, and so, but that basically was the basis for that book. It was like, these are the parents. In the book, the great guardian angel does a little chant. Show me mommy, show me dad. Amy's parents will soon be glad. And then Amy looks down between the clouds and she sees her mother and father, and the great guardian angel says, these are the parents that God wants you to have. And she says that to Amy, who's going to be adopted by those parents, and Charlie, who was born to those parents. And the story takes place in the waiting to be born heaven. So there are children up floating around on dinosaur clouds, and they're learning all the baby tricks so they can get their halo stars on their halos. So it's a cute little adventure story also, that they have to get all these, they have to know how to squeeze a finger to say I love you. They have to know how to hiccup. They have to learn all these things so that they can get the stars on their halos, and then they can get born. So it's a fun story for children, but basically it's all about, this is where you belong. And it was God's plan.
Yeah, that's a great lesson, because children have to understand how adoption is a gift of love, It's a spiritual act, and the people that take on the job of raising a baby is something that the child should honor, and they can get to understand that being adopted is not a bad thing, that they're able to get love from parents who are willing to do everything they need to make sure the child gets all the love they need. That's a great story. Thank you.
Yeah. And in my case, it was so strange that I had had a miscarriage where that baby would have been like maybe 4 months old when my husband got that phone call, when my husband called me. And had I not had that miscarriage, of course, I would have said, "Oh, I have a 4-month-old baby. I can't take another one right now." But, uh, and then I had another baby after that. So it wasn't, it just seemed like, how do you explain even, the sad subject of miscarriages? How can you explain why some babies are born and some babies aren't? And the timing, and I think it's just that in my case with my children, each one of them said, "This is where I want to be. This is where I'm going to go, and this is where God's placing me." And however, oh, at one time my son said, "Well, why am I adopted and not my sisters?" And I said, "Well, it could be that maybe my body doesn't carry boys. Some women's bodies don't carry boys." And I said, "Would you rather be a girl?" And he goes, "Oh no, not that." So he's like, "Okay, I'm okay being adopted because I have to be a boy."
That's funny. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that's a great way for parents to bring up the subject because I know that's a challenge finding out when's the right time to tell your child they're adopted, how old, and how to explain that it's a loving act, but it's a serious subject.
Yeah.
And talking about another serious subject, you have another book, The King and the Monster. Tell
Yeah.
me more about what this book is about.
Well, this book is about addiction, and it's um, based on my son's story, who had a serious addiction problem for quite a while. And my daughter-in-law called me. He was good. He was had a problem. He was good for like 5 or 6 years, and then he fell again. And then he decided he was going into a treatment facility for like almost a year because he really needed some serious help. And my daughter-in-law called me and said, Kathy, how can I explain why Dominic has to go away right now and leave our family, to my 6-year-old daughter? And it's a funny story, not a funny story, but it's a strange story. What happened after that? And it was, I couldn't say no. I'm like, sure, I'll write a book for you. I already wrote two. I'll write another book. I'll write a book for you. And I'm like, get off the phone. I'm like, how the hell am I going to do that? How do you explain to a child, the
Yeah.
whole all the complexities of addiction? And so I sort of put it out of my mind for a week or so, and then I was on a flight that had been delayed forever, leaving Chicago, out going out to LA to visit my other daughter. And I was with my other daughter and her two children. So I had like a 3-year-old child lying with her head on my lap. And it's probably 10 o'clock at night by now. And everyone on the plane is sound asleep because it's very, very late. And I finally, after hours of 6-hour delay in the airport, I put my earbuds in, my noise canceling earbuds, and I'm like, oh, finally, I can just sit here and meditate because I meditate daily, but I hadn't done it that day yet. So I'm on the plane, 30,000 feet in the air, start meditating, and the first thing I see is The King and the Monster. And then, almost as if that whole book was presented to me, I saw page after page after page of the whole story. So as soon as the story was over, I, quick pulled out my laptop. Fortunately, it was right with me, but I couldn't put it on the tray in front of me because I had a little baby's head there. So I stretched over here and typed it from a distance. But that was like the first draft for The King and Monster. Over time, through the writing of it, I interviewed a number of people who are in the treatment world, in therapy. A man who runs a retreat center, some other, addiction specialists, and so, or people who had been addicted and clean for like 30 years. So I tweaked the story a little bit here and there, and added the shadow. In the book, the king has a shadow in his heart because, like I said, my books are multifaceted. There's like the adventure story of the book, but then there's the seriousness and the depth to it. And part of the depth of this book talks about the king with a shadow in his heart that was there from long ago. And this is related to Gabriel Mate's references to trauma. And he believes that it is a trauma that causes people to become addicted. They're trying to fill this hole in their heart. And that's basically how I wrote this book, that the king had the shadow in his heart. It's very clear. One of the most important points for this book for me is that children know this is not their fault. This is, their father went away into treatment, or their mother. It's not their fault. There was something within them that needed help, and they needed healing. And that was there before the children were ever born. So, that's a very important part of the story. And looking
Yeah,
up,
I think it's a great lesson to help either children like yourself, meaning parents who might have a child or a relative that is going through addiction, and you have to explain it to your child. It's a great way for the child to understand and have empathy for people who are dealing with addiction. A lot of
yeah,
times, people dealing with addiction are put in a negative space. They're called bad and evil, and it doesn't really bring true empathy on the part of people who have to support and help people who are going through addiction.
right. And that's another very important part of this, is that addiction is something that the king has, not who he is. So he is the king, and he, in the beginning of the book, is a happy, loving father, but he has that little shadow in his heart, and his friends say, "Come down to the quicksand pit, it'll be fun." And he's like, "Well, maybe it'll help heal that shadow in my heart." But he finds out that when he gets there, it's a trap. And that's a very important thing about this book too. No one wants to be addicted. They're trapped into it. And then as they're trapped into it, he's trapped into it. This monster takes over and makes him do things he didn't want to do. Whereas he was kissing and loving his children, he was yelling at them. And they were also an important part of the story. Is show you another illustration. These group of guardian angels that we all have. We all have like a team of angels that love us unconditionally. And this team of angels are always giving him messages. Like sometimes we receive messages ourselves. We are here to help you. We love you. And finally, he goes to that, ask them for help. And when he does ask for help, the healing helpers come. And in this book, I have the healing helpers coming as superheroes. Now, when I was on the plane and saw the pages flipping through on my brain, they were dressed in doctor's outfits running down a hill. So when I talked to my son about it, he says, "Oh no, Mom, they're really big and strong. They should be here. They should be superheroes." So it's one of the tweaks I made to my original story. The healing helpers are superheroes. And and they give the king, they teach the king how to heal his heart, how to love himself, to remember, just remember how his strong and beautiful heart, remember his wisdom and his strength. And then they also give him armor to fight against any future monsters. And once he's all, and then he goes back home and lives happily ever after. So, repeat myself, it is not something that someone is, it's something that someone has, and they can let it go and live a normal life. And so that's, just, and my granddaughters, I read it to her all the time. She loves it.
Yeah, it sounds like a great story. Usually I try to pick a theme for every show, and to me, your books really are stories that teach spiritual growth and emotional healing. And I think that's great, great lessons to teach, not just to us, but to children. Can you tell us, though, have you gotten any feedback or experiences from your readers?
Well, my granddaughter likes The King and the Monster, although um, she just when my well my son is home now and he's healthy and everything is fine, but when I was first writing it, he was still in the treatment center, and she was like upset that he put his hand in the quicksand pit. Well, why did he even do that? But it was that was her reaction to it. But now that he's home and everything is fine, it's a lot easier. The Amy adoption book, about 15 or 16 years after I wrote it, I got a letter in the mail from somebody who said he needed another copy because his 16-year-old daughter still likes to read it, and she wanted another
Mhm.
copy of the book. And I was just so honored that, it as a 16-year-old, she's still reading my adoption book. I thought that was very sweet. And the Christmas book has only been out briefly, but I have a friend who's a grandmother who read it to her grandchildren. Asked her, what did, what was the response? And she said, well, my grandson looked up to me and said, oh, I'm the light of the world too. And I'm like, yep, you got it. You
Yeah,
got it.
you got the point.
Yeah, he got the point, and so I'm thrilled.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I love that all your books definitely have this strong spiritual aspect to it. But I know that's also another part of your life. Could you tell us about your work at the Heart Self Speak Collective?
Yes, that is a program that I started a while ago. Um, I've graduated and was ordained probably, well, 13 years ago now, and it was a very beautiful development part of my life. The whole 2 years I spent in seminary, and I wanted to do something to help share that. So I started writing and asking people to participate. Um, on the very first page of The Heart Self Speaks, this is what basically illustrates the full theme, and it's by T.R. de Chardin, where he said, we are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings immersed in the human experience. And that's what we are. And so, how we as spiritual beings immersed in the human experience um, live, how do we live knowing that? And the heart self speaks is recognizing the heart self, again, the inner spirit, speaking to us, guiding us, and giving us direction on how to live healthy and happy and well centered lives.
That's beautiful. So, before we end the interview, are there any new updates about maybe projects or current work that you're looking to complete or something in the future?
Yes. Absolutely. My new book, it's still in the formative stages. It's been written, but it takes a long time to bring a manuscript to a published book. And this one is on mm, death, transition, passing, but it's also on spirit. It starts out um, if you're familiar with the Kabbalistic theory that there's a vessel that breaks and shatters light all over. And in my book, it's this one bright, beautiful light and one love and one um, life. And it wants to explore and learn more and do more. So it sends two sparks of itself out. And the two sparks um, start talking to each other and decide that they want to live in the same household when they land on Earth. And so, plop, they're born on Earth, and one becomes a puppy and the other becomes a little girl. And the story is how they grow up together. And then the puppy has now become older and decides, I've learned everything I can here, and I want to move to another world so I can learn more and grow more and develop more. But he never really leaves her. So there's always that mystery of the messages that people who have passed leave for us, whether they're bird feathers or pennies or whatever people find. So in this case, he leaves balls around for that little girl. So
Sounds fun and interesting for sure. So I
yeah,
want to encourage everyone to go out and buy these books. They're great Christmas gifts. They're great ways to help parents talk about these subjects to their children. And sometimes these simple stories also help us as adults. I also want to let you see where you can find out more about Kathy's work. She has a website, booksbykathy.com. You can get her books on amazon.com. And if you're interested about her spiritual work, that's her website, theheartselfspeaks.com. And I'm sure you'll find an amazing source of inspiration. And I really appreciate you coming on today, Kathleen.
I
And
appreciate
when
you
you
having.
get that, oh, my pleasure. When that new book comes out, just reach out to me and we'll do it all over again. We'd love to get to know it
Okay,
more.
sounds like
Okay.
fun.
So I'd
Thanks very
like to thank, you're welcome. I'd like to thank everyone for joining the show. My name is Gil Hulong, and if you want to know more about my work, go to gilrolonbooks.com and you can see my story and how I was motivated to write a book on how to change your life and make things better and let that inner light out as Kathleen is teaching. That part of us that sometimes we hold back and we need to open up our hearts and release. So that's it for the show. Thank you for joining in and have a great evening.